The Silent Guardian. The lens found Victoria Ashford like a predator stalking prey. Marcus Chen, gripping a platter of miniature canapés, felt ice crystallize in his veins. He recognized that cameraman. He understood the man's actual occupation had nothing to do with photography and everything to do with erasing people from existence. He noticed the barely perceptible manner the man's fingers rested on his equipment bag. Not like someone handling a camera, but like someone prepared to extract a silent weapon. Every crystal chime was a countdown. Another invoice he couldn't pay stacked on his apartment counter. Another moment his son Ethan fought for each complete breath. Yet right now, none of that held meaning. All that existed was the man behind the lens and the woman in crimson. Victoria Ashford, radiant in her flawless red gown, remained unaware. She was beaming, wearing that rehearsed expression of authority featured in financial publications. She was receiving praise as the evening's host began introductions. A television personality with brilliant veneers started her speech for the Entrepreneur of the Decade recognition. She represents excellence in commerce, a genuine pioneer whose contributions at Ashford Genetics are transforming our world. Marcus's focus snapped back to the cameraman. The individual hadn't shifted an inch. He stood like a monument to lethal composure, vanishing perfectly among the media representatives. But Marcus perceived what others missed. The man's positioning created perfect angles with the platform and the emergency exit. It formed a killing zone. Marcus's background in executive protection, a previous existence before his reality contracted to medical facilities and graveyard shifts, screamed warnings at him. The instincts, the danger assessment, everything returned in a nauseating surge, fueled by terror. And now, please welcome tonight's honoree, Miss Victoria Ashford. Thunderous applause filled the magnificent hall. Victoria moved toward the platform, her stride elegant and assured, taking her directly into the killer's carefully calculated sightline. Marcus's thoughts raced, a frantic cascade of scenarios and impossibilities. Protection personnel were monitoring the masses, searching for evident dangers, not a predator concealed among innocents. A warning would arrive too late. The assassin was a specialist. The instant Marcus voiced concern, the individual would execute, and Victoria would collapse lifeless. He possessed seconds, perhaps fewer. He surveyed his environment, his preparation activating. What resources did he have? No firearm, no communication device. He was serving food. He held a tray of appetizers. Useless. He observed the service area adjacent to him, a silver carafe steaming, a collection of partially consumed drinks, and a substantial container of thick, dark dipping sauce. He possessed one instrument, not a weapon, a distraction, a chaotic, profession-destroying distraction. He considered Ethan, his young, innocent expression, the labored breathing that soundtracked his nightmares. What consequences would follow if authorities detained him, if he lost this employment? The consideration felt like a physical assault, but the alternative, witnessing a woman's execution before him, remained impossible. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself, and grabbed the carafe. It burned intensely, the temperature searing through the thin cloth wrapped around the grip. With determined purpose, he advanced, positioning himself to cross her trajectory to the platform. He needed to make it appear accidental, an awkward, inexcusable accident. As she passed, he collapsed. Reality seemed to decelerate. His leg buckled convincingly. The tray of appetizers launched airborne, a vibrant explosion of cuisine scattering across the gleaming marble surface. The carafe tilted, and a surge of scalding black liquid erupted across the pristine, crimson material of her gown. It resembled a blast of dark paint, a brutal, hideous mark that expanded immediately. A unified gasp extracted oxygen from the space. Victoria shouted, a piercing sound of surprise and suffering, stumbling backward from the burning heat. Her expression became a canvas of furious disbelief, her vision locking onto his. The applause terminated instantly, substituted by a stunned, horrified stillness. Her protection detail, two imposing figures in dark clothing who had been surveying the masses, descended on Marcus, their actions rapid and aggressive. One slammed him against a support, while the other shielded Victoria, forcing her backward. "Remove your hands from me." Victoria's tone was frozen, penetrating and slicing, though it wavered with shock. Marcus didn't struggle as his limb was twisted behind him. The discomfort was a remote, insignificant sensation. His vision remained fixed across the space. He witnessed it. The cameraman, the assassin, had lowered his equipment. The individual's expression was a stone facade of frustrated anger. The opportunity, the clear target, was eliminated. The chaos had succeeded. The assassin calmly rotated and began disappearing back into the masses. Just another photographer departing a destroyed occasion. "What are you attempting?" One of the guards snarled in his ear, dragging him upright. Marcus looked at Victoria. She stood there encircled by her personnel, her multi-billion-dollar evening in ruins, her gown destroyed, her skin likely burned. Humiliation and fury emanated from her. Within her rage, he hoped she recognized the truth in his vision, the frantic, desperate alert he couldn't verbalize. This wasn't aggression, it was salvation. The environment blurred into a chaotic collection of shouting and scraping noises as Marcus was hauled across the marble surface. The guard's hold was aggressive, twisting the material of his inexpensive uniform at the shoulder. "Keep moving," the man growled, shoving him toward a utility passage. "My wallet, my keys are in my storage," Marcus managed, his tone rough. It was deception, a desperate attempt for several additional seconds. He needed to plant the information. He needed one individual to hear him, one specialist who might look beyond the stained clothing and the terrified minimum-wage laborer. As they passed the ballroom entrance, he spotted him, an elevated figure with graying temples and the calm, observant vision of someone who saw everything. Gabriel, Victoria Ashford's security director. Marcus had noticed him during the preliminary assessment, registered his expertise. The manner he moved like a phantom, constantly one step ahead. He was their final opportunity. Marcus twisted his head, disregarding the explosion of discomfort in his limb. He met Gabriel's vision. The security director was observing him with a cold, analytical examination, already processing the incident documentation in his thoughts. Marcus opened his mouth, but the guard restraining him slammed him against the surface. Remain silent. There was no time to verbalize. Marcus forced his lips to shape the word, exaggerating the motion, channeling every fragment of urgency he possessed into the silent communication. "Cameraman." Gabriel's expression didn't alter, but Marcus saw a flicker of something in his vision, not comprehension, but a momentary disruption in his composure. An inquiry, it was sufficient. The guard shoved him forward again, and the ballroom, Victoria, and his final hope vanished as they descended into the stark, fluorescent illuminated corridor that led to the administrative offices. Meanwhile, Victoria was escorted into a private chamber, the entrance clicking closed behind her, isolating the cacophony of the ruined occasion. Her personal aide, a young woman named Sophie, was hovering around her, dabbing at the horrific stain with a cloth napkin. "Miss Ashford, we should get you medical attention. That liquid was boiling." "I'm acceptable," Victoria snapped, her tone tight with controlled fury. The burn on her shoulder and torso was beginning to blossom into a deep, pulsating discomfort, a fire spreading beneath her skin. But the physical suffering was nothing compared to the white-hot humiliation. She had been assaulted, made a spectacle before her colleagues, her investors, the media. The stain on her gown felt like a stain on her standing. "It was intentional," she said, more to herself than to Sophie. He looked directly at me. "It wasn't a collapse." The entrance opened, and Richard Sterling, her second in authority, swept in. His expression was a perfect facade of concern, but his vision, small and dark, held a glint of something else. Excitement. "Victoria, my goodness, are you acceptable? I've already consulted hotel protection. They have him in detention. We will prosecute this to the maximum extent. Assault, battery, will destroy him." His tone was smooth, reassuring, but his eagerness felt predatory. "Discover who he is," Victoria commanded, removing Sophie's attempts to assist her out of the ruined jacket. "I want his identity. I want to understand everything about him. I want to comprehend why a server would discard his existence to destroy my evening." "Of course," Richard said, already retrieving his phone. "He's probably some disturbed individual, a nobody. We'll ensure he suffers." Just then, Gabriel, her security director, entered the space. He closed the entrance quietly, his presence immediately calming the frantic energy. "Miss Ashford, the man is being detained in a protection office downstairs. The authorities are approaching." "Did he verbalize anything?" Victoria asked, her tone sharp. "Did he provide a reason?" Gabriel paused, his gaze steady. "No, madam. He's refused to verbalize a word. But as we were transferring him out, he did something unusual." Richard scoffed. "Everything he did was unusual, Gabriel. He's clearly unstable." Gabriel ignored him, his attention fixed on Victoria. He looked directly at me. He mouthed a word. Victoria waited. Her breathing held. The pulsating in her shoulder seemed to fade as a new sharp sensation took its position. Curiosity. He said, "Cameraman." The word suspended in the atmosphere, nonsensical and strange. Sophie and Richard looked at each other in confusion. "Cameraman?" Richard repeated with a dismissive laugh. "What?" "He thought someone was capturing his image. The man is insane." Victoria said nothing. She replayed the moment in her thoughts. The server's lunge, the heat, the surprise, and his vision. They weren't the vision of a madman. They were the vision of a man who was terrified, not for himself, but for her. It was a look of such intense, desperate warning that it had penetrated through her own surprise. "Cameraman." "Miss Ashford," Gabriel prompted gently. "Your instructions." "Charge him," Richard insisted, stepping forward. "Let the authorities manage this lunatic. We need to focus on damage mitigation with our attendees." Victoria waved a hand, dismissing them both. "Leave me, both of you. Gabriel, remain outside the entrance." Richard looked like he wanted to dispute, but a single glare from Victoria sent him retreating from the space with Sophie. The entrance clicked closed, leaving Victoria alone in the silent, luxurious space. She removed the stained jacket, wincing as the material pulled at her reddened skin. She stared at her reflection in the gilded mirror. The powerful executive, the entrepreneur of the decade, now looking disheveled, vulnerable, and marked. The entire situation was a puzzle that didn't fit. A clumsy server doesn't risk criminal charges over spilled liquid, and he certainly doesn't transmit a cryptic one-word communication to her security director. The word echoed in her thoughts, refusing to be dismissed. Cameraman. She looked at the ruined gown, a symbol of her perfect, controlled existence, now irrevocably stained. The server had stained it. But as she stood there, a cold, unsettling consideration began to form in her thoughts. What if the stain wasn't the assault? What if the stain was the warning? Downstairs, in a windowless space that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, Marcus sat on a hard plastic chair. His hands were restrained behind him. 2 hotel protection guards stood by the entrance, attempting to look imposing, while a pair of uniformed authorities conducted a preliminary questioning. "Let's attempt this again," the older officer, a man named Thompson with a weary expression, said. "What's your identity?" Marcus remained silent. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on a crack in the linoleum surface. He understood the protocol. Verbalize nothing. The moment he started talking, he was just a deranged server with a conspiracy theory. He had no evidence, nothing but an instinct born from a past existence he'd buried. If he mentioned a professional assassin, they'd think he was delusional. His only strategy was silence. He had thrown his communication in a bottle into the ocean, and his only hope was that Gabriel was a skilled enough sailor to locate it. "Listen, friend," Thompson's partner said, leaning forward. "You're in a universe of difficulty. You think she doesn't have attorneys that can make you wish you were never born. You assist yourself by assisting us. Why did you do it?" Marcus thought of Ethan sleeping in his hospital-style bed at home, the soft hum of the oxygen apparatus his constant companion. Fear, cold and sharp, twisted in his stomach. What had he done? He'd just orphaned his son for a woman he didn't even know. His gamble felt impossibly foolish now, sitting in the sterile silence of the protection office. He closed his vision, picturing Ethan's expression, and held on to his silence like a shield. Upstairs, Victoria had put on a spare blouse Sophie had retrieved from her emergency kit. It was plain, functional, and a universe away from the bespoke gown she had been wearing. She paced the length of the chamber, the adrenaline from the incident giving way to a restless, analytical energy. She opened the entrance. Gabriel stood just outside, his posture alert. "Get me everything you can on that server. Identity, address, work history, everything. And I want the complete attendee and media list from tonight's occasion. Now, Miss Ashford." Richard's tone cut in. He was striding down the corridor, his phone pressed to his ear. "I've just consulted with our legal team. They're prepared to file the initial complaint. The hotel manager is also prepared to make a statement about their rigorous employee screening to mitigate our own liability." He lowered his phone. "This is a public relations crisis, Victoria. We need to control the narrative. Focusing on some server's cryptic nonsense is a waste of precious time." "It's my time to waste," Victoria said, her tone dangerously quiet. "Gabriel has his instructions." Richard's expression tightened for a fraction of a second before smoothing back into a facade of concerned professionalism. "Of course, it's just I'm worried about you. You've had a traumatic experience. Perhaps you should let us manage the details." "I am managing them," Victoria stated, her tone leaving no space for dispute. She turned to Gabriel. "And get me all the protection footage from the ballroom for the last hour, every camera perspective. I want to see exactly what occurred." Gabriel simply nodded. "Right away, madam." He moved off with silent efficiency, leaving Victoria and Richard in the corridor. "Victoria, this is an error," Richard said, his tone a low, urgent murmur. "Let the authorities do their task. You're letting this man get in your head." "Someone got in my head tonight, Richard," she replied, her gaze unreadable. "I'm just attempting to figure out who." An hour later, Gabriel was back. He carried a tablet, his expression grim. Victoria was sitting in the chamber, Richard hovering nearby, ostensibly coordinating with their public relations team, but clearly monitoring the situation. "The server's identity is Marcus Chen," Gabriel began, his tone low and professional. 42 years old, single father. His son has a rare respiratory condition. He's been working 2, sometimes 3 employments for the past 5 years to cover medical expenses. Before that, Gabriel paused, swiping on the tablet. Before that, he was a senior protection specialist for a private firm, top level, managed executive protection for executives in high-risk territories. He departed the field abruptly 6 years ago after an incident. Victoria stared at him. A protection specialist, not a disturbed lunatic, a trained professional. The pieces began to shift, forming a new, alarming picture. Richard shifted his weight, his expression unreadable. "That doesn't signify anything," Richard said quickly. He could have snapped. The stress of his son's illness. "I've also reviewed the media credentials," Gabriel continued, ignoring Richard. "All the major outlets are accounted for. But there was one freelance cameraman whose credentials seemed thin. His identity is registered as David Klein, but the agency he listed doesn't exist. He departed the premises less than 2 minutes after the incident with Mr. Chen. A cold knot formed in Victoria's stomach. "The footage," she said, her tone a whisper. Gabriel tapped the screen. He brought up a multi-angle view of the ballroom. "Watch the man in the charcoal clothing by the east column. That's David Klein." The video played in silence. They saw Marcus moving through the tables, his expression tense. They saw Victoria beaming, beginning her walk to the platform, and they saw the cameraman raising his equipment. But he wasn't aiming at the platform. He was aiming directly at Victoria's trajectory. His stance was perfectly balanced, his movements minimal and precise. It was the stance of a marksman. Then they saw Marcus lunge, the liquid, the chaos. The camera view switched to a close observation of the cameraman as the masses reacted in surprise. His expression registered not surprise, but pure, cold fury. His jaw clenched. His mission was compromised. He lowered his equipment, rotated, and disappeared into the panicked masses. The footage terminated. The space was deathly silent. Richard was pale, his confident demeanor gone. "It could be a coincidence," he started, but his tone lacked conviction. Victoria felt the oxygen leave her lungs. The burn on her shoulder was a dull throb, a phantom reminder of the searing heat. But now she understood. That heat had saved her from something infinitely colder. Marcus Chen hadn't been attempting to harm her. He hadn't been attempting to humiliate her. He had been taking the projectile for her. "My goodness," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth as the full, terrifying weight of the truth crashed down on her. "He saved my existence." The silence in the chamber was a living entity, heavy and suffocating. Victoria sank into a plush armchair, the tablet slipping from her numb fingers and clattering onto the glass table. The video replayed in her thoughts, a horrifying loop. The assassin's cold vision, Marcus's desperate lunge, the splash of liquid that had been a shield. Richard Sterling was the first to verbalize, his tone strained. "This changes things, obviously, but we must be careful. This Chen could be involved in a more complex manner. Perhaps he was meant to create the diversion for a different reason. We can't trust him." He was scrambling, attempting to regain control of a narrative that had spun violently out of his grasp. Victoria lifted her head, and the look in her vision silenced him instantly. The surprise had burned away, leaving behind a glacial fury. "He's a single father working 3 employments to keep his sick son alive," she said, her tone dangerously low. "He sacrificed the only thing he has left, his freedom, to save my existence from a man you dismissed as a lunatic." She stood up, her movements sharp and decisive. "Gabriel, madam, call the authorities precinct where they're detaining him. Inform them that my legal counsel is approaching. All charges are to be dropped immediately. I am making no statement against him. In fact, I'm making a statement in his favor. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, Miss Ashford. And get a team to his apartment, now. His son, Ethan, I want him and Marcus under our protection. The man who hired that cameraman understands the plan failed, and he understands why it failed. Chen and his child are in incredible danger." "My thoughts, exactly," Gabriel said, already dialing a number on his phone. "I'll dispatch a premium protection detail." "Victoria, this is an overreaction," Richard protested, his tone rising. "Bringing them into our protection environment creates an unacceptable liability. We don't understand what." "I understand, Richard," Victoria cut him off, turning to face him fully, "is that I was the target of a professional assassination attempt. That man," she pointed a trembling finger toward the corridor where Marcus had been dragged away, "is the only reason I'm still breathing. And you are standing here arguing about liability. From this moment on, you will do exactly as I instruct, or you will be explaining your obstruction to the board of directors. Am I understood?" Richard's expression paled. He gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. "Understood." Victoria turned back to Gabriel. "I'm going down to that precinct. I want to converse with him myself. Victoria, no, Richard exclaimed. It's not protected. Then make it protected, she snapped at Gabriel, grabbing her coat. I'm not sitting here waiting while the man who saved me is sitting in a cage. Marcus heard the heavy footsteps approaching the interrogation space and braced himself. It was probably Thompson and his partner again, prepared for another round of pointless inquiries. The entrance swung open, but it wasn't the authorities. An attorney in a suit that cost more than Marcus's vehicle stepped in, followed by Gabriel. Marcus's vision met the security director's. Gabriel gave a single slow nod, a silent acknowledgement that the communication had been received. Relief washed over Marcus so powerfully his knees felt weak. "Mr. Chen," the attorney said, his tone smooth as silk, "my identity is Alexander Hayes. I represent Miss Victoria Ashford. At Miss Ashford's personal and vehement request, all charges against you are being dropped. You are free to depart." The two authorities standing in the corner exchanged baffled looks. Thompson stepped forward. "Now, hold on a minute. We have a signed complaint from hotel management, property damage, creating a public panic." Hayes simply raised an eyebrow. "And do you have a statement from the victim? Because Miss Ashford is prepared to provide a sworn testimony that Mr. Chen's actions, while unorthodox, prevented a far greater tragedy. She considers him a hero. Now, if you'll excuse us." The finality in the attorney's tone was absolute. Thompson threw his hands up in defeat and walked out of the space. A junior officer came in with a key and unlocked Marcus's restraints. The metal clicked open and he rubbed his raw wrists, the sensation slowly returning to his fingers. He stood up, his body aching from being slammed against the surface. "What occurs now?" he asked, his tone quiet. "Miss Ashford would like to converse with you," Gabriel said. "She's waiting in a vehicle outside." The walk out of the precinct was a blur. The sterile corridors gave way to the cold night atmosphere. A sleek black vehicle was idling at the curb, its tinted windows hiding the occupant. Gabriel opened the rear entrance. Victoria Ashford sat inside, her expression pale in the dim illumination of the dashboard. The anger was gone, substituted by an expression he couldn't quite interpret, a mixture of gratitude, surprise, and an intensity that was almost unnerving. He slid into the plush leather seat, the entrance closing with a soft, solid sound, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. For a long moment neither of them verbalized. "Your shoulder," Marcus said finally, nodding toward her. "You should have a physician look at that burn." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "It's acceptable. It will heal." She turned to face him, her blue vision searching his. "They told me who you are, or who you were, a protection specialist." "A long time ago," Marcus said. "You recognized him. It wasn't an inquiry. I've seen him before, in another existence. His identity isn't David Klein. He's a phantom, a freelancer who takes contracts others won't touch. He's one of the best. And he was there for me," Victoria stated, the reality still sinking in. "Yes." "Who hired him?" she asked, the inquiry sharp, direct. Marcus shook his head. "I don't understand. That's not how men like him function. He would never reveal his client. All I understand is that the danger was real and it's not over." Victoria's gaze didn't waver. "No," she said softly. "It's not. He understands you stopped him, which signifies he understands who you are." Her expression hardened with a new resolve. "And that is something I will not allow. You saved my existence, Mr. Chen. Now it seems it's my turn to save yours." The words suspended in the airtight silence of the luxury vehicle. "My turn to save yours." For a moment, Marcus felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. He had spent the last 6 years meticulously constructing a small, anonymous existence. He was a server, a handyman, a phantom. Now, in the space of a single chaotic hour, he had been seen, and the individual who saw him was the most powerful woman in the city. Panic, sharp and acrid, cut through his exhaustion. "My son," he said, his tone a low, urgent rasp. "Ethan, he's at home. The sitter departed an hour ago. I have to get to him." He reached for the entrance handle. a primal instinct to run to his child overriding everything else. Victoria didn't move. She simply said, "He's not at home, Mr. Chen." Marcus froze, his hand hovering over the handle. He turned to her, his vision narrowed with a sudden fierce suspicion. "What does that signify? Where is he?" "He is protected," Victoria said calmly, though she could see the storm gathering in his expression. "Gabriel's team retrieved him 30 minutes ago. There is a pediatric nurse with him. They are waiting for us at a protected location." Marcus stared at her, his thoughts struggling to process the information. A protection team, a pediatric nurse, a protected location. These were elements from his old existence, a language of wealth and danger he had attempted to forget. "You sent a team of strangers to my son?" he asked, his tone dangerously quiet. "I sent a team of professionals to protect the son of the man who just saved my existence," Victoria corrected, her tone unyielding. "I took a calculated risk that you would prefer him protected with my personnel than alone and vulnerable in an apartment the whole universe now understands is yours." The logic was cold, hard, and undeniable. He hated it. He hated the loss of control, the sensation of being a chess piece moved by a more powerful player. But she was correct. If the assassin understood his identity, locating his address would take minutes. The anger in his chest warred with a profound, soul-deep relief. Ethan was protected. He sank back against the leather seat, the fight draining out of him. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere you can't be located," she replied, as the vehicle sped silently through the glittering city streets, leaving his old existence further and further behind. The protected location was the penthouse suite of a residential skyscraper that Ashford Genetics kept for its top executives. It was a palace in the sky with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking panorama of the city illuminations. When they walked in, the first thing Marcus saw was Ethan. He was sitting on a cream-colored sofa that was bigger than their entire living space, his small legs dangling over the edge. He was watching a cartoon on a television the size of a surface, a half-eaten bowl of ice cream in his lap. A kind-faced woman in blue scrubs sat nearby, watching him with a gentle smile. "Dad." Ethan's expression lit up. He slid off the sofa and ran to him, his small body colliding with his legs. Marcus swept him up in his arms, burying his expression in his hair, inhaling the familiar scent of his shampoo. He held him tight, the solid, warm weight of him a grounding force in a universe that had tilted on its axis. "Hey, buddy, I'm sorry I'm late." "It's okay," he mumbled into his shoulder. "The nice lady said we were having an adventure." He looked over his shoulder and saw Victoria standing in the doorway, a figure of quiet authority. "Is she the queen of the castle?" Ethan whispered. Marcus managed a weak smile. "Something like that." He set him down, his hand never leaving his shoulder. He looked at the nurse. "Thank you." "He's a delight," the woman replied warmly. "His vitals are stable. I'll be just outside if you need anything." She quietly let herself out, leaving Marcus, Ethan, and Victoria alone in the cavernous living space. Victoria watched the interaction, a flicker of an unreadable emotion in her vision. She saw the fierce, unconditional love of a father, and it made the cold corporate calculus of her universe seem shallow and insignificant. This was what was at stake, this small, fragile family. "Mr. Chen, Marcus," she began, her tone softer now. "We need to converse." He nodded, guiding Ethan back to the sofa. "Go ahead and finish your cartoon, buddy. Dad needs to converse with Miss Ashford for a minute." He walked over to the windows, standing beside Victoria, though he kept a respectful distance. They both looked out at the city below, a river of illumination and movement. "You're not protected," Victoria said, getting straight to the point. "Neither of you, not until we discover who hired that man." "I understand," Marcus said grimly. "Men like him don't give up. They just alter their methods." "My resources are now your resources," Victoria stated. "Protection, financial support, the best medical care for your son. Anything you need, you will have it. You have my word." Marcus turned to look at her. I don't want a handout, Miss Ashford. This isn't a handout, she countered, meeting his gaze. It's a debt, one I fully intend to repay. But I'm also offering you employment. He raised an eyebrow. I'm a server. No, she said, shaking her head. You're not. You're the man who saw a danger no one else did. You're a protection specialist with experience in a universe I'm just now realizing I understand nothing about. I need you. I need your expertise to assist Gabriel and my team in discovering the individual who attempted to kill me. The authorities will move slowly. They'll be bound by red tape. The danger is inside my universe, maybe even inside my company. I need someone on my side who understands how to navigate the shadows. The offer suspended in the atmosphere between them. It was a lifeline. It was a cage. It was a way back into a universe he had fought to escape, a universe of violence and paranoia. But it was also the only way to protect Ethan. The choice wasn't a choice at all. He thought of the endless medical invoices, the constant grinding worry that kept him awake at night. He looked at Ethan, so small and innocent against the backdrop of immense luxury, completely unaware of the danger swirling around them. Then he looked back at Victoria, at the determined set of her jaw. She wasn't just an executive. She was a target, and that made him a target too. He took a deep breath. The smell of coffee and fear was finally fading, substituted by the clean, sterile atmosphere of wealth and power. "All right, Miss Ashford," Marcus said, his tone steady and clear. The phantom of the man he used to be stepping forward. "Tell me everything. Who are your adversaries?" Victoria didn't hesitate. She led him to a large glass dining table, pulling out a tablet and setting it between them. The city illuminations twinkled below, a silent, indifferent audience to the unfolding drama. "My adversaries are the same as any executives," she began, her tone crisp and businesslike, a familiar shield she was using to process the unfamiliar terror. Corporate rivals in the pharmaceutical space, activist groups who think we're corporate demons, disgruntled former employees. The list is extensive and mostly noise. "I'm not interested in the noise," Marcus said, his focus absolute. "I'm interested in the signal. Who understood the specifics of tonight's occasion? The timing, the protection layout, the fact that you would be on that platform at that exact moment." Victoria's fingers flew across the tablet screen, pulling up an internal document. The occasion was public, but the detailed minute-by-minute schedule was only circulated to my senior executive team and the occasion organizers. "Provide me the executive list." She turned the tablet to face him. A corporate hierarchy chart glowed on the screen, a web of identities and titles. At the top was her own identity. Directly below it was Richard Sterling. "The individual who benefits most directly from my death," Victoria said, her tone flat, "is Richard. As Chief Operating Officer, he would automatically become interim executive. The board likes him. He's smooth, he's predictable. He would have a strong chance of making the position permanent." "Tell me about him," Marcus said, leaning forward, his server persona completely gone, substituted by the sharp, analytical focus of an investigator. "What was his reaction tonight?" "Concerned," Victoria recalled, a frown creasing her brow. "He was insistent that we prosecute charges, that we destroy you. He called you a lunatic." She paused. "He also attempted to stop me from investigating your communication. He said it was a waste of time, that I should let the authorities manage it." "He attempted to control the flow of information," Marcus stated. "He wanted you to follow the simple, obvious trajectory. He wanted me to be the villain of the story because it was a convenient distraction." "It makes sense," Victoria admitted, the words tasting like poison. "But Richard has been with the company for 12 years. He was my father's protégé before he was mine. It's hard to believe. Belief has nothing to do with it." Marcus cut her off, his tone not unkind, but firm. "It's about motive and opportunity. He had both. We need to look at what's underneath the facade. Financials, communications. Who has he been meeting with outside of the office? Has his behavior altered recently?" The inquiries were rapid fire, precise, and practical. They were the inquiries of a professional, and Victoria found herself answering them. The process of laying out the facts assisting to organize the chaos in her thoughts. Just as she was about to pull up another file, the entrance opened and Gabriel entered. He nodded to Victoria, his vision assessing Marcus with a new level of respect. "Miss Ashford, the detail is in position. The building is protected. We have a team monitoring Mr. Chen's apartment." He turned to Marcus. "I owe you an apology and my thanks." "You heard the communication," Marcus replied, accepting the unspoken truce. "That's what matters." "What have you discovered?" "We've started a quiet preliminary background check on the entire executive team, with a priority on Mr. Sterling," Gabriel said, his tone low. "Nothing overt on the surface, no major debts, no obvious vices. But there is one thing. He's been systematically selling off small blocks of his personal company stock for the past 6 months. Never enough to trigger an automatic flag, but it's a steady pattern. He's liquidated nearly 3 million. Marcus and Victoria exchanged a look. The atmosphere in the space grew colder. "Why?" Victoria whispered. "Our stock is about to soar after the merger. It makes no financial sense for him to sell now, unless he needed cash for an off-the-record expense," Marcus said grimly. "A down payment, for instance. A man like the one at the occasion tonight doesn't come inexpensive." He stood up and began to pace, his thoughts working, connecting the dots. Or unless he understood something was coming that would collapse the stock price. Something like the executive being assassinated and the company being thrown into chaos. The logic was brutal and inescapable. The man Victoria had trusted, the man who stood beside her in boardrooms and at media conferences, might have been plotting her execution for months. "We can't move against him on this alone," Gabriel warned. "It's circumstantial. He'll say he was diversifying his portfolio." "I understand," Marcus said, stopping his pacing. He looked from Gabriel to Victoria. "So we don't move against him. We let him think he's protected. We let him think I'm just a server who got fortunate, a problem that has been neutralized." Victoria looked at him, understanding dawning in her vision. "You want him to get comfortable?" "I want him to get careless," Marcus corrected. "He failed tonight. His problem hasn't gone away. The audit is still occurring. You're still alive. He's going to have to attempt again, and this time we'll be waiting for him." He glanced over at the sofa where Ethan had drifted off to sleep, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The sight seemed to steel his resolve. This wasn't just about protecting Victoria anymore. It was about ending the danger so he and his son could have an existence again. "Gabriel," Marcus said, his tone now holding a quiet command that felt entirely natural. "Tomorrow morning, I need access to all of Sterling's communications, emails, phone records, calendar appointments, everything you can obtain without alerting him." He then turned to Victoria. "And you, tomorrow, you go to work. You act as if nothing has altered. You hold your meetings. You smile, and you keep Richard Sterling closer than you ever have before." The next morning, the city looked different from the penthouse. The rising sun painted the sky in soft shades of rose and amber, but the beauty felt distant, clinical, like a painting viewed through bulletproof glass. Victoria stood before a full-length mirror, fastening the belt on a slate-grey dress. The pristine crimson gown was a phantom, a memory of a version of herself that had existed only 24 hours ago. Confident, untouchable, naive, today she was a target, and she had to dress for the part. Her shoulder ached with a dull, persistent throb from the burn, a physical reminder of her new reality. Every instinct screamed at her to remain in this fortress in the sky, to secure the entrances and let Gabriel manage it. But Marcus's words echoed in her thoughts. "Keep him closer than you ever have before." It was the hardest thing she could do, and the only thing that mattered. When she walked into the living space, Marcus was already there, standing by the windows with a tablet in his hand. He wore simple dark trousers and a grey Henley shirt provided by her personnel. He no longer looked like a server. He looked like the man Gabriel's file had described, focused, dangerous, and completely at home in a crisis. Ethan was at the table with the nurse, happily drawing on a piece of paper, a universe away from the silent war his father was now waging. "Morning," Marcus said without looking up from the screen. "Gabriel set me up with access to the building's internal servers. I'm starting with Sterling's email. Discover anything?" Victoria asked, pouring herself a black coffee, her hand surprisingly steady. "Just the usual corporate doublespeak so far. But people like Sterling, they're arrogant. They think they're smarter than everyone else. They always leave a trail." He finally looked at her, his vision doing a quick professional assessment. "You prepared for this?" Victoria took a sip of the hot coffee. "No, but I'll do it." "He's going to test you," Marcus warned. "He'll be watching for any sign that you suspect him. Your story for dropping the charges has to be cold and strategic, something he'll comprehend. My attorneys advised me that a protracted legal battle with a sympathetic figure like a struggling single father would be a public relations disaster, especially during a merger," Victoria recited, the words feeling foreign and rehearsed. "It was a business decision." Marcus nodded, a flicker of approval in his vision. "Good. That's exactly what he'll believe." The ride down the elevator was a descent back into the universe where she was prey. As she stepped into the lobby of Ashford Genetics, the atmosphere was electric with gossip. Heads turned, people whispered behind their hands. She ignored them all, her expression an unreadable facade, and walked straight to the executive floor. Richard was waiting outside her office, his expression a perfect picture of solicitous concern. "Victoria, thank goodness. I was so worried. Are you certain you should be here today?" "I'm acceptable, Richard," she said, her tone cool and level. She walked past him into her office, a cavern of glass and steel overlooking the city. "And I have a company to operate." Of course," he said, following her in and closing the entrance. "It's just the news about you dropping the charges against that server. I have to say, I think it's an error. It makes us look weak." Victoria sat behind her desk, deliberately taking a moment to arrange a file before looking at him. "It was a strategic decision, Richard. Our legal team ran the optics. A billionaire executive prosecuting a down-on-his-luck single dad. The media would have crucified us. The merger is too delicate for that kind of negative attention. We cut our losses. The man is terminated, blacklisted from every high-end establishment in the city. He's been dealt with. End of story." She watched him closely. He processed her words, his expression shifting from concern to comprehension, and then to a visible relaxation. She had provided him the answer he wanted, the one that fit his worldview. Victoria Ashford hadn't gone soft. She'd just made a ruthless business calculation. He was protected. "I see," he said, a small, satisfied smile touching his lips. Cold, but intelligent. "I should have understood." He leaned against her desk. "Well, I'm glad we can put this ugly business behind us. Now about the final presentation for the merger committee." As he verbalized, Victoria felt a chill creep up her spine. He was so close, so comfortable, a predator who believed he had outsmarted his prey. She forced herself to listen, to nod, to engage, every moment a supreme act of will. Miles away in a protected communication space in the basement of the residential tower, Marcus stared at a wall of monitors. He was a machine, sifting through mountains of data, emails, calendars, expense reports. He discovered the stock sales Gabriel had mentioned, a slow, methodical bleed of assets. Then he discovered something else. In Richard's calendar, hidden among meetings about synergy and capitalization, was a recurring weekly appointment. It was labeled simply CM and had no location data. It was always on a Wednesday, always for 30 minutes, and it was always followed within the hour by a call placed from Richard's office phone to an encrypted, untraceable number. It was a thread, thin, but it was there. He started a deep search on the initials CM. He cross-referenced them with employee lists, vendors, board members. Nothing. It was a dead end. He leaned back, frustrated, and his vision fell on another screen showing Richard's expense reports. He scrolled through them idly. Dinners, flights, hotels, all of it standard, except for one recurring charge, a weekly payment to a high-end floral delivery service routed through a miscellaneous account. It was the same day as the mysterious CM appointment. Marcus pulled up the floral service, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He accessed their delivery records, his old skills returning to him with frightening ease. He discovered the weekly order from Richard Sterling. It was always the same, a bouquet of white orchids, and he discovered the delivery address. It wasn't an office, it wasn't a residence. It was a private room at the Meridian Medical Facility, a long-term care facility for the chronically ill. The room was registered to one patient, Catherine Mason. Marcus ran the identity. His blood ran cold. Catherine Mason was the widow of Jonathan Mason, Victoria's father's business partner, the co-founder of the company, who had died of a sudden, unexpected cardiac arrest 3 years ago. The same cause of death the assassin had been hired to simulate for Victoria. The information on the screen was a phantom, a spectre from the company's past, rising up to haunt the present. Jonathan Mason, co-founder, deceased at 64. Marcus felt a jolt, a live-wire connection that arced across 3 years of history and illuminated the dark corners of the conspiracy. It wasn't just about a corporate takeover anymore. This was older, deeper. He immediately sent a protected, encrypted communication from the tablet to Victoria's phone. It was only 6 words: Jonathan Mason. Check his official cause of death. In her glass-walled office, Victoria was concluding a meeting with the heads of the Research and Development Department. She was projecting an aura of absolute control, discussing clinical trial data with cool precision, but her thoughts were a whirlwind. Every time Richard Sterling had smiled at her that day, every word of feigned concern now felt like a razor blade against her skin. Her phone buzzed discreetly on the desk. She glanced at it. The communication was from the protected application Marcus had installed. She saw the identity, Jonathan Mason, and her breath caught in her throat. Jonathan was a warm memory, a man with a booming laugh who had been like an uncle to her. His death had been a surprise, a tragedy that had shaken the company to its core. She ended the meeting abruptly, a sudden migraine her convenient excuse. The moment the entrance clicked shut, she was at her terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard, bypassing the public archives and entering her father's private digital files. She discovered the folder, J. Mason, Condolences. She clicked open the file containing the death certificate. The formal bureaucratic text was cold and final. Cause of death: sudden cardiac arrest. Victoria leaned back in her chair, a wave of nausea washing over her. The assassin's weapon, the ice projectile, was designed to perfectly mimic a cardiac arrest. It wasn't a new plan, it was a repeat performance. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Jonathan hadn't just died. He had been executed, and Richard had been playing the long game all along, clearing the board of its 2 founding pieces, one king at a time. She stood up, her movement stiff, and walked to the window. The city sprawled below her, a testament to the empire her father and Jonathan had built. An empire Richard was attempting to steal over their deceased bodies. The anger that rose in her was so pure and so cold, it felt like it could freeze the sun. She packed her briefcase, her hands moving with a new, grim purpose. She told her assistant she was departing for the day, ignoring the woman's concerned expression. The ride back to the penthouse was a blur of traffic and illuminations. All she could see was Jonathan's smiling expression. When she swept into the suite, Marcus and Gabriel were waiting, a tactical map of the situation spread out on the large screen of the television. "It was him," she said, her tone devoid of emotion. 3 years ago, he killed Jonathan. We can't prove that, Gabriel said cautiously. The man was cremated. There's no body to exhume. His physician signed the death certificate. There was no foul play suspected. A physician can be fooled by a sophisticated weapon, or a physician can be paid, Marcus countered, his vision fixed on Victoria. What we have is a pattern and a link. Catherine Mason. Victoria's brow furrowed. Catherine, Jonathan's wife. She was devastated after he died. She withdrew from public existence completely. I haven't seen her in over a year. She's in a long-term care facility, Marcus said, bringing her image up on the screen, a frail-looking woman with sad vision. Every Wednesday he sends her white orchids. Why would the man who executed her husband visit her every week like a devoted friend? The inquiry suspended in the atmosphere, sinister and complex. Leverage, Gabriel suggested. Maybe she understands something and he's keeping her quiet. Or she's a part of it, Victoria said, the consideration sickening her. But that doesn't feel correct. Catherine adored Jonathan. There's a third option, Marcus said, his tone low. She's his motive. He started pacing, connecting the pieces out loud. Let's say Richard and Catherine were having an affair. She's married to a wealthy, powerful man. The only way for them to be together and have the finances is for Jonathan to be out of the picture, so Richard removes him. It's a classic story, Gabriel conceded. But it doesn't explain why he'd attempt to kill me, Victoria pointed out. If he has Catherine and Jonathan's shares, he doesn't need to be executive. Maybe he doesn't have the shares, Marcus mused. Maybe Jonathan had a will that left everything to a foundation or to you. Maybe killing Jonathan didn't obtain him the payday he expected. Killing you, however, and taking over the company, that's the ultimate prize. They were swimming in an ocean of theories, each one darker than the last. They had no hard evidence, only a chain of terrifying coincidences. We need to get to Catherine, Victoria said decisively. I need to converse with her. Absolutely not, Gabriel said immediately. If Richard is monitoring her, your presence there would be a massive red flag. He'd understand we're onto him. He's correct, Marcus agreed. We can't go through the front entrance. We need to discover what's really occurring in that room. We need to see what those Wednesday meetings are all about. He stopped pacing and looked at them. A plan forming in his vision, a plan from his old universe of surveillance and infiltration. That facility has protection, but it's for keeping dementia patients from wandering out, not for stopping a professional from getting in. I can get inside, Marcus said. I can place a listening device in her room. We need to hear what they converse about when they think no one is listening. It was a reckless, dangerous plan. But it was the only one they had. Victoria looked at Marcus, at the quiet confidence in his vision. He wasn't asking for permission. He was telling her the next move. She thought of the crayon drawing Ethan had made, a simple picture of a happy family. This man was risking everything for them. Do it, she said, her tone clear and steady. Do whatever it takes. The sterile blue and white layout of the Meridian Medical Facility spread across the large screen, looking less like a place of healing and more like a fortress. Marcus stood before it, his arms crossed, dissecting the building's vulnerabilities with a cold, practiced vision. The main entrance has a 24/7 protection desk, Gabriel said, pointing with a laser pen. Keycard access is required for all wings after 9 p.m. Catherine Mason's room is here, 4th floor, north wing. It's a low traffic area at night. Protection cameras are here, here and here, Marcus said, his finger tracing a trajectory on the screen. Lobby, main elevator bank, and the nurse's station on her floor. There's a blind spot in the rear service corridor. I can get in through the loading bay. The night shift is lazy about checking manifests. I'll go in as a third-party contractor for the HVAC system. It provides me a reason to have a tool bag and be on any floor I want. Victoria watched him, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. He verbalized with such calm authority, as if discussing a routine repair task and not a high-stakes infiltration into a web of execution and conspiracy. Is it protected? she asked, the inquiry sounding weak even to her own ears. Marcus finally looked away from the blueprints, his gaze meeting hers. "No," he said simply, "but it's necessary." Before he departed, as he was changing into a nondescript work uniform, Ethan ran up to him. He held out a crayon drawing. It was a picture of a stick-figure man with brown hair holding hands with a little boy. Above them, a big smiling sun shone in the corner. "For good luck, Dad," he said, his tone small and serious. Marcus knelt down, his large, capable hands gently taking the flimsy piece of paper. He looked at the drawing, at the simple, perfect universe his son had created, and the weight of what he was doing settled on him. He was walking into the dark, so his son could remain in the illumination. He carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into his breast pocket, a fragile piece of armor over his heart. "Thank you, buddy. I'll keep it protected." Victoria stood in the doorway, a silent witness to the scene. The fierce tenderness in his expression struck a chord deep inside her, a sensation she couldn't identify. When he stood up, his vision met hers over Ethan's head. "Be careful, Marcus," she said. The words more than just a polite sentiment. They were a plea. He gave a single firm nod, and then he was gone. The night was cold and moonless. The loading bay of the medical facility was a cavern of concrete and shadows smelling of disinfectant and diesel fumes. Marcus, dressed in a grey jumpsuit with a fake company logo, walked with a confident stride, a heavy tool bag slung over his shoulder. As predicted, the night watchman barely glanced up from his tabloid, just waving him through after a cursory look at a forged work order. Inside, the atmosphere was still and sterile. The fluorescent illuminations hummed, casting long, distorted shadows down the empty corridors. Every footstep echoed, unnaturally loud, in the profound quiet. He took the service elevator, a rattling metal cage, up to the 4th floor. The entrances opened onto the pristine, polished corridor of the north wing. He saw the nurses' station at the far end, a small island of illumination in the dimness. A single nurse sat there, her head bowed over a crossword puzzle. He kept to the opposite surface, his rubber-soled boots making no sound. He reached Catherine Mason's entrance, room 42B, and his hand hovered over the handle. This was it. He slipped a thin piece of metal from his sleeve and slid it into the lock. It wasn't a high-protection entrance. A few deft movements, a soft click, and he was inside. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of medical monitors by the bed. He could hear the soft, rhythmic puff of an oxygen apparatus and the shallow breathing of the woman in the bed. He moved with liquid silence, his vision quickly adjusting to the gloom. He saw the bedside lamp, his target. The device was a tiny marvel of engineering, disguised as the base of a standard electrical plug. All he had to do was switch it with the lamp's existing plug. He knelt by the surface outlet, his fingers working quickly. He unplugged the lamp. The room plunged into near total darkness. He fumbled for a moment, his heart hammering against his ribs. He discovered the outlet again, guiding the new plug into the socket. Done. He was about to stand when he heard a sound from the corridor. Footsteps coming closer. He froze, his body tensing, every muscle coiled. He pressed himself flat against the surface beneath the window, shielded by a heavy curtain. The footsteps stopped directly outside the entrance. The handle turned. The entrance swung open, casting a long rectangle of illumination into the room. The night nurse stood there, her silhouette framed in the doorway. "Mrs. Mason," she called out softly. "I thought I heard something." Marcus held his breath. He was completely exposed. If she took one step further into the room, he could see her vision scanning the darkness. She took in the sleeping form in the bed, the silent apparatus. Her gaze lingered for a heart-stopping second on the now dark lamp. "Must have been dreaming," she murmured to herself. She pulled the entrance closed, and it closed with a soft final click, plunging the room back into darkness. Marcus didn't move for a full minute, letting the adrenaline recede. He rose slowly, his legs shaky, and slipped back out of the room as silently as he had entered. Back in the penthouse, Victoria and Gabriel were standing over a speaker set up on the table, the atmosphere thick with tension. Marcus walked in, stripped off the jumpsuit, and tossed it on a chair. "It's done," he said, his tone strained. He nodded at the speaker. "Let's see what we've obtained." Gabriel tapped a key on a laptop. At first, there was only static, then it cleared. The sound filled the silent penthouse, the soft, rhythmic puff of the oxygen apparatus, the faint hum of the monitors, and the shallow, medicated breathing of a sleeping woman. They listened for what felt like an eternity, the mundane sounds a strange anticlimax, and then they heard it, a new sound, the distinct metallic click of the entrance to room 42B opening, then closing. Footsteps, heavy and male, crossed the room. The silence stretched. Then a tone, not the nurse, a man. His tone was low, almost a whisper, but it was filled with a chilling, venomous impatience. "Catherine." Richard Sterling's tone hissed through the speaker. "Wake up! We have a problem!" The three of them froze, leaning in toward the speaker as if drawn by a gravitational force. The atmosphere in the penthouse, once a sanctuary, now felt thin and charged, a conduit for the poison seeping out of the small black box. Through the speaker came the sound of a rustle of bedsheets, then a weak, slurred tone, thick with sleep and medication. "Richard, what time is it?" "It doesn't matter what time it is." Richard's tone was a low, vicious snarl, stripped of all its corporate polish. This was the real man, the one who lived in the shadows. "The plan failed, Catherine. Everything is falling apart because of some meddling no-account server." "Server?" Catherine's tone was a confused whisper. "I don't comprehend." "Of course you don't," he sneered. "You never do. The Victoria Ashford problem was supposed to be solved tonight. A tragic accident, just like Jonathan, but it was ruined. She's alive, and she's asking inquiries." Victoria flinched, as if struck. Gabriel put a steadying hand on her shoulder. Marcus's expression was a facade of stone, his vision burning with intensity as he listened. "But why?" Catherine murmured. "Jonathan's will, it's done. You have control of the estate funds." "Isn't that sufficient?" "Sufficient." Richard let out a short, incredulous laugh that was utterly devoid of humor. "You think this was ever about just the finances? Jonathan was going to ruin me. He discovered about the offshore accounts. He was going to expose me, have me arrested. He had a new will drawn up, you pathetic fool." The revelation hit the penthouse with the force of a detonation. "A new will," Catherine whispered, a note of fear creeping into her tone. "Yes, one that left every penny of his fortune to a ridiculous environmental charity, one that cut you out, cut me out, left us with nothing. He had one copy hidden somewhere only he understood. He was going to file it with his attorneys the day after he had his accident." Victoria's hands flew to her mouth, a choked gasp escaping. It all made sense. The execution, the urgency, the systematic cruelty. "He told me he would destroy me." Richard's tone was practically a hiss. "So I destroyed him first. And with you as my grieving, pliable widow, signing everything I put in front of you. I've been bleeding his estate dry for 3 years. But Victoria's audit would have discovered it. She's too intelligent. Too much like her father. She had to go. Then with me as executive and in control of Jonathan's fortune through you, no one would ever be able to touch me." "You're a monster," Catherine breathed, her tone gaining a sliver of strength from her horror. "Don't take the moral high ground with me, Catherine," he spat. "You think these flowers are a sign of affection. They're a reminder. I am the one who keeps you alive." The sound of a small click came through the speaker, followed by the beep of a medical device. This little apparatus, Richard's tone was now unnervingly calm, provides you the precise dosage you need to counteract the rare blood disorder that suddenly appeared after your husband died. The one that keeps you so conveniently weak and confused. The one that will kill you in a very painful manner in less than a week if I decide to stop the treatment. So you will do exactly as I instruct." The raw, calculated evil of it was breathtaking. Victoria felt sick to her stomach. This wasn't just execution and theft, it was torture, a slow, methodical destruction of a human being. "What do you want?" Catherine's tone was broken, defeated. "I have to accelerate the timeline," Richard said. "I can't risk another subtle attempt. It's going to be messy, but it will be definitive. The final merger vote is in 2 days. Before that, there's going to be a tragedy, a fire at the main laboratory. Victoria, our brilliant workaholic executive, will be caught inside working late. A terrible, terrible accident." Gabriel's expression was grim. "He's going to burn the building down with her in it. And the beauty of it," Richard continued, his tone dripping with arrogance, "is that the initial investigation will point to corporate sabotage. I've already laid a false trail leading to our biggest competitor. By the time anyone unravels the truth, I'll be so entrenched, so powerful it won't matter. Now I need you to sign these papers, a final transfer from the estate trust for expenses." They heard the scratch of a pen on paper, then his footsteps. The entrance opened and closed, and the room was silent again, but for the soft, steady puff of the apparatus that was both keeping Catherine Mason alive and holding her hostage. Gabriel reached over and shut off the speaker. The silence that followed was louder than the screams in Victoria's head. She stood frozen, seeing not a business problem, but a vision of fire, of Catherine wasting away in a hospital bed, of Richard sitting on a throne built of bones. She turned and looked at Marcus. The last trace of the client-bodyguard dynamic was gone. Her vision was filled with a cold, righteous fury. This was her company, her family, her universe that he had violated. "We're not going to wait for him to act," she said, her tone a low, steel-edged promise. "We are going to destroy him." Marcus met her gaze, the hunter in him fully awake now. The mission had altered. This wasn't just defense. It was an extermination. "He's correct about one thing," Marcus said, his tone calm and deadly. "The merger meeting is his deadline. It's the finish line he's racing toward." He looked at Victoria, then at Gabriel. "So we're going to use it against him. We're going to turn his finish line into a trap, and we're going to make certain he runs right into it. Live in front of his entire universe." The 48 hours leading up to the merger vote were a masterclass in controlled deception. To the outside universe, and more importantly to Richard Sterling, Victoria Ashford was an executive under immense pressure, reeling from a traumatic occasion, but determined to push her company's crowning achievement over the finish line. She was at every meeting, her tone sharp, her focus seemingly absolute. She kept Richard in a tight orbit, consulting him on minor details, deferring to his judgment on optics, making him feel indispensable. She was playing the part of his pawn, all while positioning her pieces for checkmate. Behind the scenes, it was a silent, frantic war. The first move was liberating Catherine Mason. While Richard was occupied in a budget meeting with Victoria, Gabriel dispatched a private medical transport team to the Meridian facility. Armed with meticulously forged documents citing a sudden critical cardiac occasion, they transferred a sedated Catherine to a protected wing of a private hospital owned by a trusted Ashford genetics board member. By the time Richard made his next scheduled visit, his hostage was gone, substituted by a new patient and a nurse who understood nothing. His primary leverage had vanished. Marcus became Victoria's shadow, officially appointed as a transitional protection consultant in the wake of the unfortunate incident. He had unrestricted access to the building and its systems. He and Gabriel worked out of a hidden communications room in the tower's sub-basement, a nerve center of screens and encrypted data streams. They watched Richard's every digital move, mapping his communications, tracking his search history. They saw him attempting to contact the assassin, the calls going unanswered. They saw him researching chemical accelerants for fires. He was getting desperate, his arrogance curdling into paranoia. The morning of the merger was overcast, the sky a dull grey slate. Victoria stood in the penthouse dressed in a navy blue power suit, the colour of iron and resolve. Marcus handed her a small, nearly invisible earpiece. "I'll be in the communications room with Gabriel," he said. "You'll have a direct line to us. The authorities are on standby 2 blocks away. The moment you provide the signal, they move in." "And the signal?" Victoria asked, her heart a steady cold drum. "Say the word foundation," Marcus replied. "When you converse about your father's foundation, he'll never see it coming." She looked at him, at the quiet strength in his expression. In less than 3 days, this man had gone from a stranger to the anchor of her entire universe. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, the words carrying a weight that went far beyond gratitude. "For everything." He simply nodded. "Just get through this." The boardroom was filled to capacity. Board members, investors, and the senior partners of the acquiring firm sat around the massive mahogany table. At the head of it sat Victoria. To her right, Richard Sterling, looking confident, almost smug. He believed he was hours away from victory. He thought the laboratory fire was still his ace in the hole, a plan he would execute that very night after the vote was protected. The meeting began. Financials were presented. Projections were discussed. The mood was optimistic, celebratory. Finally, the chairman of the board turned to Victoria. "Miss Ashford, before we cast the final vote, would you care to verbalize a few words?" Victoria rose to her feet. A hush fell over the room. She looked around the table, her gaze pausing for a fraction of a second on each expression. Finally, her vision settled on Richard. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, her tone calm and clear. "Today, we are not just finalizing a merger. We are solidifying a future built on the foundations laid by my father and his partner, Jonathan Mason." Richard smiled, a slight patronizing incline of his head. "They were men of vision," Victoria continued, her tone gaining strength. "They believed in innovation, in integrity. They believed in constructing something that would last, something that would assist people. They believed in creating a worthy foundation. It was the signal." In the sub-basement, Marcus verbalized into his microphone, "Go." Victoria continued, never taking her vision off Richard. "But a foundation is a fragile thing. It can be nurtured and grown, or it can be poisoned from within, corrupted by greed and ambition." Richard's smile faltered. He shifted in his seat, a flicker of confusion in his vision. "For 3 years," Victoria said, her tone dropping, becoming as cold and sharp as ice, "we believed Jonathan Mason's death was a tragedy. We now understand it was a betrayal." The atmosphere in the room altered instantly. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled around the table. Richard's expression went white. And just a few nights ago, Victoria pressed on, her tone ringing with power. "That same betrayal was meant for me." Behind her, the large presentation screen, which had been displaying the Ashford Genetics logo, flickered. It didn't switch to a financial chart. It switched to a high-resolution photograph of Catherine Mason, frail in her hospital bed. Richard shot to his feet. "What is the meaning of this? Victoria, this is inappropriate." "Sit down, Richard," Victoria commanded, and the authority in her tone was so absolute that he sank back into his chair. And then the audio began. The recording from the hospital room. Richard's tone, raw and unfiltered, filled the stunned silence of the boardroom. The Victoria Ashford problem was supposed to be solved. A tragic accident, just like Jonathan. Gasps filled the room. The board members stared, their expressions facades of horror. Richard looked like he'd been turned to stone, the blood draining from his expression, his vision wide with disbelief. The recording continued, each word a nail in his coffin. His confession to Jonathan's execution, his methodical poisoning of Catherine, his plan to burn Victoria alive. As his tone detailed the plot for the laboratory fire, the main entrances of the boardroom swung open. Two uniformed authorities stepped in, followed by Detective Thompson. They walked with quiet, grim purpose directly toward the head of the table. The recording played Richard's final arrogant words. "By the time anyone unravels the truth, I'll be so entrenched, so powerful it won't matter." Thompson reached the table and placed a hand on Richard Sterling's shoulder. "I think you'll discover that it does," he said quietly. "Richard Sterling, you're under arrest for the execution of Jonathan Mason and the conspiracy to execute Victoria Ashford." Richard didn't resist. He was a hollow shell, his empire of lies having crumbled around him in less than 5 minutes. As they led him away in restraints, his vision met Victoria's one last time. In them, she saw nothing but the pathetic, empty ruin of a man who had lost everything. Weeks later, the city was settling into a new autumn. The scandal had been immense, but Ashford Genetics, under Victoria's unshakable leadership, had weathered the storm. The merger was complete. Richard Sterling's trial was set to be the biggest news of the year. Victoria stood on the balcony of the penthouse, which she had since purchased. She watched the sunset paint streaks of gold across the skyline. The entrance slid open behind her, and Marcus stepped out, holding 2 glasses of wine. He was now the permanent head of corporate protection for the entire merged company. "Ethan is asleep," he said, handing her a glass. "He drew you a picture of a castle. He says you're the queen." Victoria smiled. A real, unguarded smile. "He's not incorrect." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the illuminations of the city begin to twinkle to existence. Down in a private recovery center, Catherine Mason was slowly regaining her strength, the poison leaving her system, the truth setting her free. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in 3 years, it was hers. "My father and Jonathan," Victoria said softly. "They wanted to construct a foundation of healing. Richard twisted it into something monstrous." She turned to look at Marcus, her expression serious. "I want to honor them. I want to construct something clean again." "You will," Marcus said, his tone full of a quiet certainty that she found she could rely on more than anything else in the universe. "Not alone," she replied, her gaze holding his. "This company, my existence, it needs a protector, someone who understands what's real, someone who understands what's worth saving." Marcus looked at the city, then back at her. The memory of a spilled carafe, of a desperate, selfless act of chaos, felt like a lifetime ago. It had been the end of his old existence, but standing here beside this incredible woman, with his son sleeping safely inside, he realized it hadn't been an ending at all. It was the beginning of a new foundation, theirs. 6 months later, the crisp autumn atmosphere was filled with the sound of laughter. Not the polite, restrained laughter of a corporate ballroom, but the pure, uninhibited joy of a child. Ethan Chen, his cheeks rosy from the cold, ran across a field of fallen leaves, chasing a bright blue ball. There was no wheeze in his chest, no faint blue tinge to his lips. The portable oxygen tank that had been his constant companion for years was gone, substituted by the simple, miraculous freedom of a deep, easy breath. Marcus watched him from a park bench, a thermos of hot chocolate resting beside him. A soft, unfamiliar sensation had taken root in his chest over the past few months, something he eventually recognized as peace. The constant grinding fear that had been the soundtrack to his existence had finally gone silent. He was no longer just Ethan's protector, fighting a battle on all fronts. He was just his dad, watching him play. A vehicle entrance closed softly, and a moment later, Victoria sat down beside him on the bench. She wore a simple cashmere sweater and jeans, a universe away from the armor of her power suits. She looked at Ethan, a genuine warm smile gracing her lips. "Look at him," Victoria said, her tone filled with a quiet wonder. "The clinical trial reports are one thing, seeing him like this is another. It's your work that did it, Marcus said, his gratitude a steady, constant current. The new gene therapy. You fast-tracked it. I prioritized it, she corrected gently. It was the correct thing to do. It's what Ashford genetics was always supposed to be about. She took the cup of hot chocolate he offered her, their fingers brushing. The small, simple touch felt more significant than any business deal she had ever closed. They sat in a comfortable silence, watching Ethan. The universe had moved on. Richard Sterling had been found guilty on all charges, his arrogant confession in the boardroom sealing his fate. He would spend the rest of his existence in a maximum protection prison. Catherine Mason, now free from his chemical prison, was slowly recovering. She had taken control of Jonathan's estate and poured its vast resources into the charitable foundation her husband had intended to create, a final act of love that his killer had attempted to prevent. "We launched the Chen grant last week," Victoria said, looking out at the park. "The first round of funding is already assisting a dozen families to obtain access to treatments they thought they could never afford." She turned to him, her blue vision clear and direct. "It turns out saving existences is a much better business model than destroying them." Marcus smiled. He saw the alteration in her, the warmth that had thawed the ice of her corporate persona. She was still a brilliant, powerful executive, but now she was leading with her heart, not just her head. Ethan, tired from his playing, came running back to them, his expression bright. He launched himself onto the bench between them, leaning his head against Victoria's arm. "Are you staying for dinner, Victoria?" he asked, his tone hopeful. "I wouldn't miss it," Victoria replied, wrapping an arm around the little boy's shoulders. Marcus looked at the two of them, his son and the woman who had become the center of their new, unexpected existence. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, creased piece of paper, worn soft from being handled so often. It was the crayon drawing Ethan had given him for good luck the night he broke into the medical facility. A stick-figure man and a little boy under a smiling sun. "I kept this with me," he said quietly, showing it to Victoria. "It was my armor." Victoria smiled, a deep, knowing expression in her vision. "I have one too." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, showing him the lock screen. It was a photo of a crayon drawing framed and sitting on the corner of her massive office desk. A picture of a castle with a queen in a blue dress standing at the window. Ethan looked from the drawing in his father's hand to the photo on Victoria's phone. A slow, happy grin spread across his expression. He slid off the bench and took Marcus's hand, with one of his and Victoria's with the other, pulling them to their feet. The three of them stood there for a moment in the fading autumn illumination. A man who had been a phantom, a woman who had been a target, and a little boy who was the heart of them both. They were not a story of a rescue or a scandal or a merger. They were the story of a family forged in chaos, built on sacrifice, and just beginning their foundation. And as they walked out of the park together, leaving the shadows of the past behind, they looked exactly like the picture. A perfect hand-drawn circle of three. Finally, home. So that's the end of our story. I really hope a piece of it stays with you. If there was a moment, or even just a character that really hit home, I'd honestly be honored to read about it in the comments. It's just amazing to see how one story can land in so many different ways. Look, if you believe stories like this are a kind of illumination we need in the universe, your support means everything. When you like and subscribe, you're doing more than just assisting a channel grow. You're really casting a vote for stories that aren't afraid to look at what makes us human. And you're assisting that illumination find someone who might be in the dark. Thank you for lending me your time. It means a lot. Until the next chapter, take care of yourselves and each other.